Welcome to How's Your ePresence? I am Mark Galvin, your host, and this show is brought to you by ePresence. We are so glad that you are with us today. This is a wonderful afternoon. I am so glad that we're recording a show today because I've been a little distracted with world events today. So it's nice to have a little bit of a break and talk to somebody that'll be very interesting. So stick around. You're going to love our guest today. We are a show that likes to produce wonderful content to help business people do business a little better, learn something new about marketing, learn something new about whatever it is that'll help you do your business better. So check out our channels and see if there's something there that can help you achieve. Maybe you're interested in SEO, how to do SEO better, or maybe even podcasting. We offer a lot of shows about that type of content. Go check that out. We'd love for you to subscribe. So hit the subscribe button from wherever you are. Please jump in there and hit that button. If you have a question for our guest, please ask a question. We will pose that to our guest today. Today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about launching a podcast. How about that? If you've been thinking about launching a podcast, we don't typically talk about podcasting here on How's Your ePresence. So this is going to be a great subject. We're also going to talk about how to manage a marketing budget and looking at social media at law firms. So that means you can tell we probably have a guest today that works at a law firm, and that is right. Our guest is going to be Marcie Mangan. She's with Salvi. I got to look at my notes to make sure I say this correctly. Salvi, Schostok, and Pritchard. And this is a law firm in the Chicago area. And Marcie she is the director of public relations for the law firm, but she started in local TV. She came from CBS and Fox, and she hosts the law firm's official podcast, Beating Goliath, A Plaintiff's Pursuit of Justice. She has a degree from Butler University, and I love talking to people from Butler because that's that college that had a basketball team go deep into in the Final Four, and I was pulling for him, for the record. Well, I think that's all of the notes I have for the beginning of the show. It is. Let's see if we can find Marcie and bring her up to the screen. There she is. Marcie, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. So you're so used to being on TV and being a reporter. Is this just like that? Tell me. Yeah, we're just like a regular TV show, right?
Exactly like it.
Well, we're definitely not that. For those of you listening on the podcast, I was shaking my head trying to get her to say yes. But Marcie, we're glad you're here. You're really passionate about media, and you started your own podcast for the law firm. But I'd love for you to share with our guests, really, what do you do and why do you do it?
Sure. So here at the law firm, I am the director of public relations and marketing. And when I first started working here about 6 years ago, my focus was mainly doing media relations and just making sure that we were pitching our cases and any settlements and verdicts to the news and just trying to build some brand awareness through the media. But since then, I've kind of taken on some advertising. I'm helping create ads that go into legal publications. I'm managing all of our social media. We have a team that creates content for us through our digital marketing company that we use. But I oversee all that and just kind of make sure that the voice that is going out is consistent with our brand and sounds like us. So on top of that, we also recently launched a podcast, as you mentioned, and it is called Beating Goliath, A Plaintiff's Pursuit of Justice. And it took us a while to kind of figure out the direction we wanted to go with our podcast, because I'm sure, as you know, Mark, the podcasting industry, there are so many directions you can go. You can kind of go this interview format. You can go more editorial where you're telling a story. So I am hosting this podcast, and I can, of course, get more into that. But that's a big part of my job right now as well.
That's awesome. All right. Yes, I'd love to get into that because you are doing the harder version of podcasting. And that means you're actually writing something and telling a story versus doing what we do, where we bring great people on and riff for 30 minutes. Yours is harder. It takes more time, but I think the payoff could be really great for you. I'm really curious, when you started to launch the podcast, what were the systems? What were the marketing mechanisms that you used to try to grow the attention to the podcast? And how's it doing?
Yeah. It's really interesting you say, because I think there's so many different formats. And like you said, I don't necessarily think that the editorial side is harder, because for you have to kind of be on as you're doing it. Whereas I can record my lines, do some editing if I don't like the way I said something.
So
So
this
there's
is
the
me
benefit.
normally. I'm not, Morgan will tell you this. You're like, yeah, that's him every time we sit and talk. So yeah, being on is true. That is a good point. But I just think all that writing you have to do, and you're probably, you probably edit it 5 or 6 times, and you got to figure out how to convey true emotion on paper. I think that's hard. So my hat's off to you. It's nice. Thank you for that compliment. But it feels like, I don't know, and I may be wrong. I do think what you're doing is a lot harder. And I've listened to a few of your podcasts. I think you're doing a great job because you're great at telling a story. So storytellers could easily look at that. If you're not a storyteller, maybe not.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we worked with a really great company called Lemon Pie. And this was our first podcast. So, I've worked in the media space before, but I had never worked in podcasting. So they were really helpful in walking us through what we needed to do, where we needed to market this, what were the steps to even getting it launched in the first place, helping us create an interview guide. I think, as you mentioned, it is a very labor intensive process.
Yeah. Right.
So before we even got started, I would say it took probably 6 months to figure out which direction we wanted to go. And we ended up going with the route we wanted to share stories from our clients, because we not only wanted this podcast to resonate with lawyers, we wanted it to resonate with non-lawyers who can maybe be inspired by an incredible recovery story, or someone who just has this resilience. And I think we were able to accomplish that with this case that we featured first. We have 3 episodes on this man named Tom Newhagen, and he was a 33-year-old Army veteran who suffered this devastating foot injury while he was working at McCormick Place here in Chicago. And I mean, he was so young, and I just can't imagine what that was like to all of a sudden not know if you're ever going to walk again, because he didn't know if he was going to lose his foot. He didn't know really what his life looked like after this accident. And this podcast it walks you through like who Tom is, this wonderful guy who, has his whole life ahead of him. And then he suffers this devastating injury, and it walks you through his process of recovery and the emotional ups and downs of that. And then kind of how he came to our firm, and how our firm was able to help him and work through the legal issues he was facing as well. Right. And, ultimately win him a wonderful verdict for him so that he could begin the recovery process. And I think lawyers can learn some great trial tips from this, and hear how, to connect with your client on a personal level, because Tom and his lead lawyer are still very good friends and keep in touch. And that's a great story in and of itself. So I think a lot of lawyers can learn just how to connect with your client on that level from this podcast, and how to overcome maybe some challenges that the defense can bring up in these types of cases. But non-lawyers, I mean, I know I interviewed Tom, and afterwards I was just like, I should not be complaining about the things I complain about, or I shouldn't say, I don't want to get up and run in the morning, because the day we recorded, he's still recovering from this foot injury, and he had rode like 20 miles on his bike or something, because he just is that determined to get back to normal life.
Oh, that's just really cool. I would think that sharing the real stories like you're talking about, that you are with Tom, will help people understand the value of what a law firm can do for them. So it is easy, and I would certainly be one of these people. So this makes, and I could see myself doing this. I could see having a challenge, having an injury, and think I ought to just deal with it. Right. And that humanizing it in the way that you are helps not only potential clients, but also just general public understand if this is the kind of thing that happens to you, you have some sort of way to manage that. And I think that that's a really valuable message because especially guys like,
Mhm.
I
Right.
can handle it. Right. And
Exactly.
humanize it in the way that you are is cool.
Yeah, it kind of shows you
The
that there is hope
right,
sometimes. Like things can be a lot of our clients come to us at the worst point in their lives. They've suffered a tremendous loss or they're facing a catastrophic injury. And these people really do teach you that there is a way for life to go on and they're so resilient and it's inspiring. And we're excited to share these stories because they are incredible, incredible people. And we do have some great cases to highlight on the horizon that we're excited about.
oh, that's really cool. How do you deal with how do you deal with getting a client to do that? I could see you could ask someone that's like, I'm not interested. That has to be a hurdle to start off with, is it?
That's a great question because even on the media relations side of my job, a lot of times we'll say, what you went through is something that a lot of people, this could happen to a lot of people, and they should know how to avoid an accident like this or what to know if you go to the doctor and something horrible happens to you. Like you should know that you can come to a lawyer and, be made whole again or
Right.
attempt to be made whole again. So I think a lot of times sharing these stories is important because it is important for the public to know, what could happen, the things that could happen to you. And, knowledge is power. So a lot of times what
Right.
we'll say is, sharing your story not only is inspiring for people, but it does show awareness and it prevents this from happening to someone else in the future. So if you're saying, we had a case a few years ago where a man went in for a routine root canal and ended up just horribly injured. Long story short, the dentist dropped part of a tool down his throat and he ended up in the
Oh,
hospital.
that's a
And
problem.
yes, exactly. And
Whoops.
a lot of us have a fear of the dentist to begin with. So working on this case it was just horrifying to read what happened to this man, and he almost died. And
Oh my
we were
gosh.
able to share that story on the news. And I know he was really hesitant about sharing it. We were like, listen, people need to know that what happened to you was an avoidable mistake. And if your dentist
Mhm.
isn't taking this step and you notice that, you need to say something. So we'll
Yeah.
just highlight the importance of, sharing your story could help other people.
Yeah, I think that that's brilliant. And the message needs to get out there. I totally get people being hesitant, right?
Yeah.
There is this I don't know if the word is stigma, but there is certainly a feeling that if it gets out that I did this lawsuit, it could hurt me.
Hmm.
And connecting it the way you are through a podcast and telling that story makes it easier to understand that that's okay. Right? This is stuff that happens. It can happen to
Right.
anyone, and you have some sort of way to manage that. Well, let's get back to the podcast. I think all that is very interesting. It speaks to some of the things that we deal with when people are trying to find content for their social media. What can they share? Asking clients to share content is something we encourage, but it's hard. Even if the client is just buying a widget, they're still very worried
Hmm.
about sharing that.
Yeah. I
So
think, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. I just, to that point about asking clients to be a part of something, we also never want to be pushy. If someone is
Right.
very hesitant for a reason, like it is important to us to respect their boundaries, and they obviously have a reason for not wanting to share. So we try to respect that. But there are ways to say, this could help people.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's great. So, how is the podcast doing? How's it performing? Are you guys getting a lot of downloads? Even and you've got 3 episodes now, and this is even better for a new podcast. How are things going?
Right. So we're really happy with it. I mean, as I mentioned, this is our first one. So we didn't really know what to expect as far as downloads or, what's good and what's bad. And I will
Right.
say, so we launched in August of
Okay.
2021, and we're still working on putting together our next batch of episodes. But in that time, since we've kind of had that lull in pushing out another episode, we've consistently had new downloads. So people are finding it because We have episodes up on YouTube. We're promoting it on our blog. We're promoting it on our website. We have a big banner on our website that says, click here to listen to our latest episodes. So it's right there when you go and check out salvilaw.com. We're pushing it out in our newsletter so that people know. And it's a story that is evergreen. It's not something that kind of, it's old news at some point. It's a story. So we are trying to continue to push it out and keep people interested in it. And we have been successful in that because people are finding it based on our metrics. And we are tracking that through a website called Transistor. And it's really great because you can kind of look at different metrics and who's finding it when, which times are like the hot times. And it's really cool to look at the metrics of all that.
Yeah, it is really cool. So Transistor is your podcast host, I'm guessing.
Correct.
It's where that's the server, and they distribute your podcast to all the places like Spotify and
yes,
Apple and so on. So we use Liberated Syndication, Libsyn, Libsyn. And if you're going to start a podcast, you've got to find that host first that you really like. And there are so many good options out there. The thing is, like what Marcie just said, you got to get good analytics. You got to be able to see how things are going and what those downloads look like. That is really cool. So if I'm a business, do you think it's a good idea for me to think about launching a podcast? And if I would, what the heck would you encourage me to talk about?
I think podcasting is the it thing right now. I mean, everyone I talk to, friends, family, everyone is taking in new podcasts, looking for new content. So I think launching one, it's not like you're behind the game right now. Like there's room for everyone because I'm pretty sure like 90% of the population is listening to podcasts right now. And
so Marcie, you said something I think is really interesting. I got to jump in here. You don't think someone's behind the game if they jump in now, right?
I don't think so. Do you?
I don't know. Right. So it's always that thing where you're always wondering, gosh, you know what? Is it too late?
Right.
There's a lot of podcasts out there, right?
Especially post-COVID. I feel like a lot of people were launching it because you're stuck at home. What can you do? Launch a podcast.
I think consistency is a big deal. I think that starting it and sticking to it and just making sure that cadence is there is important. And I'm going to guess this is a challenge you guys are looking at too. So there is pre-production in yours. You've got to write it. You got to find somebody who's willing to talk about it, right? Yeah, you can talk about my thing. And then you got to write it and you're going to work it. And then you got to sit down and record it. That is a ton of work. Getting that cadence and keeping that rolling, I think is real important because that's how people get used to listening to you. But what I like about what you guys are doing is in other versions of the legal space, like I'm thinking of Criminal, right? Mm-hmm. Criminal is one of the most famous podcasts of all time, I would say.
I listen to a lot of
I love Criminal. They have to go out and find their content. Well, your content self-presents, doesn't it? Right? You can sit down and say, "Hey, I need to know someone who has a client that you think would be game for this and has a compelling story, and it can just bubble up in meetings." And so that may be easier. What do you think?
That is a great point because I will say, being in the position I am as the PR person, I'm writing the press releases when the cases are filed.
So you kind of see it.
Right. And I've kind of written the story to a certain extent, obviously not nearly as in depth as it is on the actual podcast, but I'm writing the story of what happened from the actual injury to the lawsuit to the verdict. And I can kind of see like, okay, this would make a great story for the podcast, or I'm able to get to know the clients a little bit through my job. So I will say I'm not kind of shooting in the dark, not really knowing what I'm getting into, just because I do have a little bit of background from the initial PR of the case.
Got it. Okay. So, and I totally interrupted you. You were on a roll there and I jumped in the middle of that. So businesses should do this. They're not behind the 8 ball. And is it good for branding? What do you think? Is it helping and it appears it is because you guys have it on your website and you're pushing it other places. So it's good to promote the quality of the law firm. And I'm going to say in a law firm space, in case anyone you don't know, to go to Google and to buy the words that law firms want, they're expensive, right? So I've
Great
heard
point.
that I've heard that a Google word for a law firm can be per click $300, $400, $500. Is
It's an
that
expensive
right?
business. Yeah.
Unbelievable. I
And
just
that's
I
what I
just can't
think
imagine.
is great because I think with PR, there is just a lot of people when you think of marketing, it's strictly digital, it's Google, it's advertising, which is expensive. And I think,
Yeah.
especially for smaller companies, there's so much potential there to promote your business without breaking the bank. You can, post on social media. That's totally free. We are so lucky that we live in a world where you can create a business page for free and you can promote your podcast on that. You don't need to spend, thousands of dollars on a press release service. You can send an email, develop your own relationships with the media and kind of be the in-house PR person on your own. So
I think you just read my next question for the record. This is like such a good
got off on
segue.
a tangent on there, but I think to answer your original question from like 5 minutes ago, I do not think that people are behind the ball. I think with podcasting, there is so much room for creativity that we haven't even explored what we can do with podcasting. I mean, even look at your podcast. You're going live and you have it in so many different spaces that you've kind of taken yours to a new level. So many people can look at their business and find an angle that people could find interesting. And there's so many people in the world with different interests and, a thirst for wanting to learn things that, of course, there's space for everyone. And I don't think people will get sick of it. And I know a lot of people who listen to podcasts during the workday, and it's a long workday. Like, I'm sure they are looking for new content to get from their shows.
100%. So I love podcasts. I counted up the other day that through a week, if I count up every single podcast I listen to, and this is including news and everything else, I'm listening to over 80 episodes a week.
Oh,
80.
wow.
Yeah.
That is impressive.
Well, but do keep in mind that, so I get up in the morning and I go to my news playlist. It's probably the right thing to call it. And my news playlist has 12 podcasts on it. And there's sports, there's news from the right, there's news from the left, there's news from the center, there's news from overseas. And so all those count, but it does allow me to have more control over what I consume. I absolutely get irritated when I listen to some news people. I'm like, that is your opinion. I don't want that. I just want the news. So you can contour that. But there's so many other things. And our producer, Morgan, and I talk about podcasts all the time. And she said, oh, you should check this one out. There is more out there. On the weekends, when I work, I listen to podcasts, working around the house or doing whatever. I'll listen to podcasts about history. One of my favorites is that guy. I'm going to pull this up because I don't want to mess this up. There's Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
So his shows are 5 hours long. One show can be 5 hours long. And he's gone through and he'll look at an entire region and talk about the history of, say, China, and then the history of, say, Japan. And he goes over a long period of time. He's extremely engaging. He's like high energy. Well, and it's free. It's free.
That is mind-blowing to me that these are still free now.
There's advertising, and so can I tell you a secret? I have a podcast app that I use, and it's called Overcast. It allows me to program each of the podcasts to start a minute late, right? So it'll skip the first minute of a podcast. So I skip all the early commercials of podcasts.
Oh, wow.
I love this podcast app. The other ones don't do that. But yeah, podcasts, I don't think they're going away. I think they're only going to become more and more popular because of the age of streaming TV. It's really what it is. It's streaming radio. So for those of you that like that, I think that that's important to note.
I do think for small businesses, even, I mean, I know there's a lot that goes into creating a podcast. It is time consuming, but it's not rocket science. I think if you take the time to learn what you're doing, get the correct equipment, it can be easy and it can be fun because you're talking about something that you like, you're interviewing people you're interested in. So I highly suggest businesses look into this, even if you think you're too small to be doing it. I don't think there is such a thing as too small.
So there's another part to this that's important to know, and that is that some businesses only target their potential clients to interview. That's a great way to have a conversation with a client or potential client that you'd like to spend a little time getting to know. Doing a podcast that their client is going to be engaged in, that's a smart way to do it. The ability to put together a show like ours, we're using StreamYard to stream this to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And it's somewhat easy, decently easy to do. So I do think that's a very good point. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to ask you one quick question about PR, since you're from that space. And a lot of our business listeners don't have or really don't want to hire somebody to do PR. What do you suggest if you were talking to a business person, they say, hey, do I need a PR person? What would you tell them and how would you tell them to manage it?
I think I would say start small and simple. Look at your capabilities, figure out who you have on your team and who's able to do it. You don't need to allocate a ton of money to your PR strategy. I think you can figure out do you have stories that you can share with the news? Start social media. If you don't have social media, I think that's something that every business should be on. It's so easy, it's economical. You're building an audience, and if you're new to that space, pay attention to what's resonating with your audience, figure out what they're engaging with, and just work on building a small community in whatever your field is that you are trying to build. But I don't think that you need to go out and hire a PR agency to market your business. You can potentially do that in-house. Just make sure that you are spelling things correctly, being friendly. I think as a PR person, you are the face of your brand a lot of times. So make sure that, you are clear with what you're saying. You are, writing correct emails. You are not making typos. And I think that's a great starting point. Just figure out and then go from there.
Good. Oh, I love that. Great advice. You've shared so much great info. I got another question for you, but I can't throw it at you because we're out of time. Where do you want people to track you down? Where's the best place for people to go?
Sure. My law firm's website is www.salvilaw.com. And then, as I mentioned, we are on Facebook. So we are www.facebook.com/salvilaw.
Outstanding. Well, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed our conversation with you today, Marcie. Thank you for coming on. How's your ePresence? And I found out before we started talking that you're not on a whole bunch of podcasts. So this is special since you've carved out a little bit of your time to show up on our show, and I appreciate that. I really do.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Absolutely. And so, folks, don't forget, they are dropping their podcast called Beating Goliath, and there's more to it. It's not just Beating Goliath. What's the whole name, Marcie?
It's Beating Goliath, A Plaintiff's Pursuit of Justice.
Check it out.
Kind of a mouthful, but if you type in Salvi, Schostok, and Pritchard or Salvi Law, you'll find it.
All right. Fantastic. So add it to your podcast feed. Check that out. Be ready for more episodes because Marcie is sitting around. She's writing them up as we speak. I'm sure they're going to have some wonderful episodes coming up. Marcie, thanks again. We appreciate you being here. Hang on a little bit. We got a little post-show questions that we want to touch base with you on, but thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So for the rest of you folks, thank you for being here. We're always looking for great people like Marcie to join us because we're always interested in trying to help you do something new with your business. This show is produced by ePresence, and our website is ePresence.me. That's ePresence.me because it's all about you. At ePresence, what we do is we manage social media. We manage it for individuals as well as companies. We also offer consulting and training. So if you need any of that type of work, any type of help, say you want your salespeople to do a little better on LinkedIn, we can help you with all of that. By being a listener, you get a 5% discount on all of our services. Just go right there to the link on the screen, e-pr.me. Thank God it's on the screen because I can't speak all of a sudden. e-pr.me/listener, and you can take advantage of a 5% discount on all of our services. So ePresence is everywhere. This show, How's Your ePresence? It's everywhere. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Wherever you are, hit that subscribe. It's on this side. Hit that subscribe button. Morgan, you'd figure I would know where that button is by now. Hit that button. That way you know when we go live and you could pop in and ask our guest a question. If you like podcasts, go to our website. You can find our podcasts at epresence.me/podcast. epresence.me/podcast. The producer for this show is Morgan Wood. We appreciate all the work she does. Until next time, for my guest, Marcie Mangan, I am Mark Galvin. Thank you for watching How's Your ePresence?